All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. It is Tuesday, November 9th. We are meeting at 7 o'clock here to interview our potential new police chief for the town of Berlin. Call to order at 7 o'clock. Close enough. Let's see.
This meeting is being recorded.
This meeting is being recorded. Your voices, well, no, your voices won't be heard. Your images might be, but your voices won't be. Our voices will be. One announcement, if you have a cell phone, I ask you to please put it on mute, and please do not use it during the meeting. All right, so thank you for coming tonight. It's a pleasure to see you. So how do you guys want to do it? Do you just want to go down the aisle one question at a time, 3 questions at a time?
I think we should just, I think this is easier. Just
go. I would keep them grouped as they are and just go in order.
And I'm gonna.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it down. I'm gonna pull it down while I'm chatting.
You're far enough away from all
He's
of us.
6 feet.
You
can.
take yours away.
Yeah.
Too.
All right. So Eric, what we'll do? Each board member has 3 questions. So, as decided, we'll go down. We'll ask our 3, and then we will leave you plenty of time at the end for you to come and ask questions for us. To the folks in the audience, we will not be entertaining any questions, comments, or feedback during the interview process or the deliberation process. So, thank you for being here. All right, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Serving the public. That's why we're here. This is a 2-parter question. Please share with us your plans and how quickly you will enact them to have the department perform community outreach and define those types of outreach efforts.
So, as you know, we have a small department. Since I started in 1996, I would consider us have always been a community policing department. We've always been part of the community. Over the years, we've obviously designated student resource officer, community resource officer was the same. We rely on social media to keep us posted when events are happening. So every officer during their shift has an opportunity to take part in all these community affairs that we have and to outreach to our community. We advocate for officers to get out of the cruisers, especially for coffee, go to different spots, see residents, speak with people. I think that we've always been doing that, and I would like to continue to do that, to be part of everything going on in town, whether it's myself, one of the officers, or half the department when we do our toy drive. We'll typically get 5, 6, 7, 8 officers to do the toy drive, and to me that's being out in the public and being part of the community.
So the second part to my question is, what are you currently doing in your town for community service, either as an officer or as a private citizen?
Well, I obviously been for years, I've worked with Berlin Link to hold fundraisers for the school. I actually invited back to my family farm where 100% of the proceeds are donated back to them. Do the same thing for the Scouts, Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts of the town. Pre-COVID, you would see me in the schools a lot with Officer Goulding. Halloween, I was out. Usually most holidays I am out, whether it's the Christmas in Berlin or the tree lighting, Halloween. I think I have 23 poppies hanging in my locker from Memorial Day. Like I said, I've always been part of almost every community event. Even the parade, donated one of my tractors and my wagon. St. Joe's took my tractor and the Girl Scouts took a wagon. So yeah, I think I've been part of the community and will continue to do it.
Awesome, thank you. Question 2. I'm assuming you have reviewed the annual budget that is available through the Town of Berlin website?
Yep.
Could you please share with us your specific plans with either current or future police budgets to ensure the budget does not exceed the overall percentage increase in the total town budget, which is at 2.5%?
So for years, as you know, we've always relied on part-time officers. And with the Bridge Academy coming up, there's some unforeseen costs. those unforeseen costs are far less than what the 2.5% that would be allowed. You know, you're looking at probably $150,000 to $175,000 increase if we lost those part-timers on top of the part-time budget. For the last 5 years, I've spent my time doing scheduling and making sure that we stay within budget, and we've definitely stayed on target and come under budget pretty much every year through scheduling. You know, the one thing I do see in the near future that I would like to invest in is a mental health clinician to be working with us on a regular basis. But that would be hopefully a shared cost between multiple towns, not just Berlin.
Okay. And my final question, could you please tell us about your process? Who have you spoken to? Who have you reached out to? The research that you have done to learn about our town?
26 years of experience.
No, I know. All right, rephrase. What will you continue to do to learn about our community in our town?
Stay involved.
Okay. Chris?
What are the skills most needed to be a good police chief for the town of Berlin?
One of the biggest things that I lead by example on is being empathetic. I think that you have to have an understanding of not only your employees, but also your residents. I think that, you know, Berlin is a unique town, and the people are fantastic. And I always say there's things the laws tell us that we can do, but there's things that we should do. So I think, you know, the biggest understanding that you know, you have to have the best interests of everybody in mind when you're out there on the road and when you're making decisions as a police chief.
Okay. The new Berlin police chief will be expected to achieve certification of the department, followed by accreditation. Keeping this in mind, discuss your leadership and communication style and your impressions around a most effective command structure. How will you ensure awareness and accountability, attention to detail, and policy compliance with the Berlin Police Department? And I'll repeat anything you want.
So in 2019, we implemented our new policy and procedures that are all online. Every officer has access to them, so there's no question or no doubt what our policy and procedures are for the department, which is absolutely fantastic. When I started in 1996, I was given a 3-inch binder to read. And I know we went a period of time where officers were coming on weren't getting those 3-inch binders. So, and some of us worked under different rules and regulations than other officers for quite a while. So now we have a set standard with the new policy and procedures. What else was the question?
Let's see, I'll start back here. Keeping in mind, discuss your leadership and communication style, your impressions around a most effective command structure.
Okay, so I've been doing the training for the last 5 years, keeping track of training, assigned officers training. Very well versed in where we're going with the Bridge Academy and with expectations of training. I'm on top of all that. It's something that I probably will not give up or hand over to the next person until I can train somebody else to do that. It is complicated to keep officers up to date on all training. We came up with a new form that we do for all trainings, and we're trying to combine trainings. Training that maybe took 3 hours, another training that took an hour, and now we're combining the two to pay for the 4 hours of the training for the people. As far as leadership, I mean, I think everybody knows within the department that we're all on the same page. We want to become better for the department and for the citizens of the town. And we try to get officers to as much training as we possibly and financially can. Anything else?
I'll just read this next part again if you want to add anything. How will you ensure awareness and accountability, attention to detail, and policy compliance with the Berlin Police Department?
Yeah, the policy and compliance, obviously, if I become aware of something not being adhered to, you know, I have no issues whatsoever doing an internal affairs investigation on that. We haven't been faced with any real issues like that in the past. I don't foresee any of those issues happening in the future, under my leadership. As far as, paying attention, every officer knows what's expected of them out of the MPTC. And they know where our benchmarks are to get things done. So I believe it will be a smooth transition. We're not a large department, so there's a lot of communication between us. So I think that is also a benefit.
Do you feel as though there'll be any issues with achieving certification and accreditation?
I don't believe there'll be any issues. By the time Chief Galvin left, we were pretty well set. We met all of our deadlines last June, and we're well on our way right now with especially 3 part-time officers going through the Bridge Academy, getting their physicals and getting them enrolled in the academies.
Okay. And my last question is, Berlin is a very small town where everyone knows everyone. What would be your advice to your officers on how to remain impartial with residents when investigating a case?
I think most officers, when they work with us, they understand that we have to be neutral. We can't take sides. We have to investigate both sides and take the appropriate action, whether it's popular or not. It's not a popularity contest for us. It's doing what's right.
Okay.
As you think about police reform and the new policing standards in Massachusetts, in what ways do you feel like you have supported conversations around diversity and inclusion? And in what ways will you, as Berlin's police chief, continue those conversations?
We'll always continue the conversation. We had these conversations prior to police reform. When I look at police reform, I look at the way Berlin's done things for years, or actually decades here. We've stayed up on training. We actually trained one of our officers to be a trainer for implicit bias training. Who then turned around and trained all our part-time force that couldn't make the daytime trainings. There's not a training on diversity that I don't attend, that I don't try to, I assign other people up to attend as well. Our training is there, it's just getting the officers to get there, give them the pathway to go. And that's one thing that I'm really put an emphasis on is training, and that's one area that we need to train a lot on between mental health and diversity.
Berlin is not immune from crime and opioid crisis.
That's correct.
What level of commitment with respect to preventing domestic violence, assaults, and overdoses in Berlin, and then what other stakeholders would you engage in these prevention efforts?
So as far as our opioid crisis, we do have Sergeant Gilchrist and Officer Reed. They're on a task force where they report any opioid use and outreach program for anybody that will take it from us. As far as domestic violence, we just want everybody to know that we're an open department that you can come talk to. And I think the biggest prevention of domestic violence is for people to speak out. Domestic violence is probably one of the largest dark figures of crime that we have in town, based on our 2-acre house lots, 200 feet minimum between houses or driveways. So I think a lot of domestic violence probably does go unreported. But when it does get reported, we will reach out to the people and get them any assistance they can, whether it's through us or through the courthouse.
I'm sad to say I don't know this, but the officers all carry Narcan?
Yeah, we carry, Narcan is in our defect cases.
Okay. Give us a sort of overview of what, like your first 30 or 60 days. If you were as chief, in terms of sort of internal management and external affairs and community engagement, what are some of the things that would be sort of high on your list, and what do you think some of your challenges would be in the first month or two?
The first month or two is the fact that we're understaffed right now. So staffing will be the first large undertaking as the next chief. We have one officer hopefully be off field training in 6 weeks. that's going to relieve some of it, but if I move up, there's going to be an empty spot to fill. And hiring is not an easy process anymore for law enforcement. So that will be the number one. Number two thing, I'd like to work with Vicki downstairs and try to get a area regional clinician to be working with us.
You good?
I'm good in the formal questions.
Okay.
I'm always the one who wants to go off script, and I'm always nervous about whether I'm allowed to go off script or not without getting into any trouble.
You can go off script ×3, then you're fine.
Yeah.
But like specific questions.
No, you can't ask specific questions.
Well, you could, as long as we write them down and ask all the other candidates the same.
Yeah, that's what we just said.
No, I will skip because it wouldn't be as
Specific.
Yes. I have no problem when this is done saying what my question was going to be, so that people know I'm not trying to hide anything and I don't have anything. None of them were gotcha questions. But,
So Eric, we've left you plenty of time. What questions do you have for us as a board?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've been well aware of what's been going on in town, so my questions are pretty much done. You know, I know the expectations of the board, so, you know, for me to ask you what your expectations of the next chief are, I pretty much know your expectations to keep the department going forward, you know. And, you know, I've got no issues with that. You know, 26 years invested here.
yeah.
Do you have anything that you would like to add?
I don't. I enjoy working with you. I do.
Well, either way, I'm not going anywhere.
That's right. I enjoy working with you, no matter what.
Everybody asked me the stress of this, and I said, well, just understand one thing, I still have a job afterwards.
So any other questions, Scott, that you can kind of sort of weave in that can apply to the other two candidates?
No, I'm good for now.
Okay. Chris?
I think you asked about the budget, Peg.
I did.
So I think I'm good.
Okay. And you're good. And I'm good. And we still have a boatload of time.
A boatload.
Boatload. Seriously, no questions.
We're gonna have to recess, I think.
To be fair, interviews are much shorter when there's generally knowledge between the parties of each other.
Correct.
Yeah.
You know,
Correct.
There's questions he doesn't have to ask of us, because again, you've been in town 26 years, and
Doesn't
this
feel
is-
like it, but I have.
Yeah.
Time
I
flies.
still feel like I'm 25.
All right.
I
Well,
know that too.
should we then adjourn until
Recess.
7:45? Recess?
Research.
We're going to recess. We're going to recess for about a
Recess,
half an hour, and then we'll be back. All right, we are back. Thank you for coming. I'm Peg Stone. I'm the chair of the Select Board.
Chris Keefe.
And I'm R. Scott Hawkins. Which name later on, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
We will get to that. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. Each board member has 3 questions, so we'll do 3 at a time, and then leave you plenty of time at the end to ask us any questions, follow-up questions, either the ones that we asked, or ones that are burning in your brain. All right, you ready?
Very well.
I'll start. Mine's a 2-parter. So the first part of my question is serving the public. It's what we do. It's why we're here. So please share with us your plans and how quickly you will enact them to have the department perform community outreach, and please define those types of outreach efforts.
Well, like you said, police work it's a service industry, and we're involved in service to the public. So to that end, we should be concerned and interested in whether or not the product that we're producing is working for the consumer. So as far as community outreach, you know, I consider it to be, you know, community engagement. As you probably know from my resume, I started all of the social media and maintain all the social media accounts with the Auburn Police Department. you know, over the 3 platforms that we actively use, they reach about 27,000 total followers. I'm sure there's some repeats in there, obviously. But what that does is, what it allows you to do is get your message out and describe for the public and, you know, advise the public and the community what you're doing and, you know, what their role is in that. I mean, community, you know, policing in the community generally is you are reliant on the community, and the community relies on you, and you're a part of the community, and you're representatives of the community, and everybody that you hire should be representative of the community. But not everyone in the town or in the community wants you or wants to be involved with police work, or they're like, that's great, it's your job, you handle it. But those people still need to be informed. You know, they're not maybe actively engaged in the sense that, you know, we don't have them out answering calls or anything like that, but they need to be informed, and just so they're aware of what is going on. And one of the reasons I started and like social media is that it's a way to reach a large amount of people in a short amount of time. But I don't think it should only be used as, you know, an affirmation. You know, say we're taking a victory lap and, you know, everyone's happy to hear from us. There has to be, in order to be engagement, it has to be a two-way street. There has to be communication. It has to be a back and forth. So that's one level, obviously, of community engagement. But the most important, excuse me, the most important way to engage the community is to be in the community. And whether it's through, you know, something as simple as a simple motor vehicle stop, where you're stopping someone for speeding or not stopping completely at a stop sign or whatever the case. That's a chance not only to educate, but to interact with that person. No one says it has to be a ticket. No one says it has to be, it could be just a conversation. And as long as you're treating people fairly and with respect, and, you know, then those things are all gonna, again, further, hopefully, a positive image of the police department. So, I mean, those things should be ongoing, and they should start from day one. Or at least under me, they would. And if that's not already the case, you know, I think we all agree that it should be.
Yeah, thank you. So my part 2 of that is, could you share with us what you're currently doing in your town for community service, either as an officer or as a private resident?
Yeah, I was absolutely brought up to be involved in giving back and volunteerism. My parents were they were involved in that. It was something they wanted us to do as children. Obviously, I'm far from being a child, but you know, in my community directly, obviously, it's in the past I've volunteered as a high school football coach. I coached the Auburn high school football team for almost 7 years. My wife and I, at one point, started it was like a kind of a closet type idea where we were providing clothes for, even in Auburn, I was surprised to find out, you know, some people that, you know, were struggling and quite honestly didn't have, you know, there's a lot of people going through a lot of different things right now, but even back then they were. And, you know, we were involved with Secret Santa and everything through the police department, but it kind of took on a different, it went a little bit further. So we were, you know, not recycling, but older clothes, we would donate them, and this, you know, if like one of the younger people at school had a problem, you know, with clothes or with, you know, holes in the clothing or something like that, they would be able to access these clothes, because between my wife and I, we have 4 children, so they're all adults, but, you know, they grew obviously rather quickly, and we ran out of clothes, or, you know, we moved through clothes very quickly. So that was one thing, you know, that we had done. Again, I just believe that as a police officer, when you choose this, you know, there's a lot of things that matter in the world, but, you know, who or what you choose to serve is more important than any of those things. And, you know, me personally, I don't think there's, that I can think of off the top of my head, a higher calling than public service, and whether that's, you know, direct community service, or it's, you know, through your job. I mean, obviously, we're compensated to do the job that we're doing, and in some cases, we're compensated very well to do that job. But it has to be in you. Service has to be, I think, ingrained in you. And I was fortunate, I guess, in the early days to have that, you know, give back mentality. And that was always something that we were brought up on. So it's something that's carried forward for me, and I've encouraged my children to do it as well, so.
Great, thank you. So I'm assuming that you have reviewed our annual town budget, which is online on townofberlin.com?
I looked at the town report from 20, the most recent one, yes.
Okay. So given that, what are your specific plans with the current budget and future budgets, future police budgets, to ensure that your budget does not exceed the overall percentage increase in the total town budget? So that's about 2.5%.
Okay. Obviously, excuse me, in budgeting, personnel costs are always going to be fluctuating. Normally, always they're increasing, generally speaking, at least for contractual employees. You know, so there has to be other places that you can look. There's ways to, you know, to save money as far as, and I'm not 100% familiar with how. I know the staffing can go as low as one officer, and you know, there are ways through scheduling to be creative about gapping certain people that way, you know, certain officers that way. You have coverage overlapping in certain times, and especially if you're going to look at, you know, what is your peak time, or what are your peak times for calls for service, and you know, address your personnel deployment that way. You know, as you probably saw on my resume, I have a pretty extensive history with grants and writing grants and using those grants to supplement, not supplant, but supplement the budget. And you know, I've been in the past very successful doing that, so that's something I'm actually kind of proud of. But it's, you know, I don't know exactly what grant opportunities the department has availed itself to, but you know, there's highway safety grants out there. Obviously, with the regional dispatcher already taking advantage, I'm sure, of all the grant opportunities that come through that. But you know, there's equipment grants. There's ways to supplement the budget and not, you know, not be tied down to the actual budget. I mean, again, it looked, at least from what I saw, that they didn't spend, they gave back money for the part-time officers and a little bit from the full-time officers. And so that, I don't know if that's a staffing situation or if it's, you know, I don't know what the pay rates are for people. So I mean, I'll admit that I do not know those things. But you know, there's always ways to be creative and to hold the line. I mean, in where I work currently, we've frequently had to level fund and not been able to increase, you know, even when you have contractual obligations, you know, to personnel that are increasing. And you know, we've always somewhat had the luxury of an open position here or there where you could, you know, alleviate some of that cost or pass it off onto that open position by not filling it. And you know, no one wants to, you know, to shortchange or compromise public safety or officer safety, but as long as it's being done safely and it's in line with the contract that exists, then you know, you have to do what you have to do.
Okay. And then my final question, could you please tell us your process about either whom you've spoken to, reached out to, research that you've done to learn about our town?
Sure. I won't regurgitate your Wikipedia page because I think that's a little disrespectful. And I've been in other interview processes where I've heard candidates, well, you were settled in 1812. And, okay, great. You know, what I gathered basically from what I could find online and from talking to a few people is that, you know, there's about a little over 3,000 people, 3,200 people, 3,300 people, and about 2,000 of those people are registered voters. So they're, you know, they're at least engaged in the democratic process and they're interested in paying attention. So I think that's an excellent thing, personally. It's, from what I can gather, again, it's a small town that, like many small towns, similar in size or location, you know, not, I want to say struggling with its identity, but definitely trying to figure out the balance between, you know, growth and, you know, the financial benefits of that growth and, you know, some of the ramifications of it, but also maintain that small town charm and the reasons that most of you probably chose to live here. You know, there is something that, you know, You hear people say all the time, they're not making any more land. You know, it is what it is, and unfortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, there's a lot of it here. And, you know, most of the growth, from what I can see, has been confined, I guess for lack of a better word, to the outskirts or to the outside parts of the town, you know, whether it's on the Marlboro line or on the Hudson, you know, so, which is excellent. I mean, it's great where you're still deriving the benefit of, you know, some commercial expansion, but yet maintaining that small town charm, like I said. You know, I noticed obviously through some research you guys with the board and the town administrator, which one thing, just as a quick aside, I don't know if it was a collaboration or your idea, and the Google Drive, the transparency that everything's out there. There's not a lot of towns do that. So it's excellent. Like when you can see a contract or see a memorandum of agreement that's been executed, you kind of go, okay. You know, and speaking to that about the host agreements with the marijuana facilities, and you know, that's another thing where people, you know, towns specifically, Auburn has steadfastly refused, you know, and they tried to zone it to a particular part of town where it, you know, it became essentially unattractive to the businesses. And you know, my own personal views, I think it's a little short-sighted, just because it is a revenue stream and it's here. You don't have to, you know, like it or not. I mean, that's your personal preference, but it's not going away. It was voted by the voters, you know, it was approved, and so you might as well derive what benefit you can for your community. So, you know, kudos for doing that.
Okay.
If it matters coming from me.
We appreciate that. All right. Chris, you want to go with your three?
What do you think will be the most important skills needed to be a good police chief for the town of Berlin?
I mean, clearly,
From what you know, I guess, about Berlin.
clearly, you know, the most important thing is leadership skills, and you know, I've been a student of leadership, and I attended the leader classes for the FBI, the Law Enforcement Executive Development Association, and I'm passionate about leadership. I've continued to read about it. You know, you're a lifelong learner. You have to continue to stay driven and motivated, and I think leadership's a big thing. I could talk for hours about leadership, but I won't. That's clearly one of the, you know, people aren't going to buy into your vision or any of it unless they buy into you as a leader. And then, you know, first and foremost, you have to prove to them, are you worthy of being followed? You know, am I trustworthy? Do I have integrity? You know, your reputation will take you a certain distance, you know, because people will do their research and they'll find out what kind of police officer you are and what kind of a manager you are and what kind of supervisor you've been over the past 19 or so years. But then I have to prove it. I have to prove it, and I have to earn their respect, and I have to earn their trust. And yeah, that's each and every person. But at the same time, they need to be held accountable, and there are going to be rules, and there are going to be minimum expectations, and if you meet those minimum expectations, they'll never be a problem. But if you exceed those expectations, well, then you start to look at possibly, you know, the benefit of, obviously you're out there living the mission, so to speak, and embodying that in the community, then, well, all right, we can talk about a specialty assignment or, you know, extra training. And quite frankly, when I left my hometown of Norwell in 1997, went to Auburn, it wasn't for more money, it wasn't for it. Police officers stay or leave dependent on, in my experience at least, on opportunity, you know, opportunity for advancement, or just any kind of opportunity, career advancement, and training. And it's not usually a monetary thing, generally speaking. You know, I honestly would have concerns about someone that would just leave for money, personally. But so I think making those things available are, you know, important, and I think that's a great way to keep people inspired and keep them moving forward.
Okay. This is sort of a multi-question question. The new Berlin Police Chief will be expected to achieve certification of the department, followed by accreditation. Keeping this in mind, discuss your leadership and communication style, and your impressions around a most effective command structure. And do you want to answer that first, or shall I go on?
Whatever your preference.
I can go back to any part of it if you'd like.
Sure.
And then, how will you ensure awareness and accountability, attention to detail, and policy compliance with the Berlin Police Department?
Accreditation is, I'm glad to hear that that's a priority. I don't currently work in an accredited department, but I am aware of, obviously, the importance of it, and I fully support it. I have attended, on my own, I've attended all the accreditation classes so I'm certified to go out and assess other communities. And so I think it's incredibly important. It gives you the best, policies that are available, in the industry, and again, it obviously creates a potential, insurance break for the town itself once you are accredited. I assume from the question that you've already gone through self-assessment and now you're starting into certification, or is it a process that's ongoing?
I believe so.
Okay, so as far as, making sure that people are accountable, again, I have my own, what is going to be acceptable and what is not going to be acceptable as far as what your behavior is and conducting yourself both on and off duty. And, that comes down to, are you conducting yourself with integrity and honesty both on and off duty? Are you being fair? Are you treating people with respect within not only the community, but within your department, your fellow employees? And it doesn't just apply to outside the building. It's also inside the building. And sometimes that's where some of your problems come from or emanate from initially. As far as ensuring accountability with the standards, there's software available that will basically ensure, it'll show that the officer has read and understood the policy, and it acknowledges it through an electronic system. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of accreditation is actually still paper-based with folders and whatnot. I'm a little surprised they haven't completely made an electronic format, but either way, I mean, the standards are what they are, and for a smaller department, there's fewer of them, but they need to be met. And the important, again, it's an ongoing training process. It's like expectations or any change in policy. Here's what the expectation is, here's what the policy is. Do you understand it? Let's train on it. Ask any questions. If you have any questions, then we can review them and move forward from there. But in this same room, actually, as part of the assessment center, and whether I should say it in a public forum or not, but I said that I believe in accreditation so much that I pay for the first year out of my pocket. So that's how much I believe in it, because it is valuable to. I mean, for an agency the size of Berlin, it's $1,800 or $1,900, right? I think for this fiscal year, if I'm not mistaken. And I've done everything I can to suggest it to my current boss, and he just doesn't believe in it for whatever reason, and I haven't been able to convince him otherwise.
Okay.
Did I miss any piece of that?
I'm gonna look back here. I don't think you missed anything.
Okay.
It's good.
Thank you. We never got into the R. Scott thing.
Oh, no, you have one more.
Oh, yeah.
You have one more.
My second.
Oh, you will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Berlin's a very small town where everyone knows everyone.
Yep.
What would be your advice to your officers on how to remain impartial with residents when investigating a case? Because I'm sure there's, in some cases there may be a tendency, if you know them.
Absolutely. What would be the advice? I mean, we all have biases. We all have, whether they're, you pray to God they're not explicit, but, everyone has implicit bias. It's just the way it is. You can't, all you can do is be aware of it, and not act based on that bias, obviously. That would not be forgivable. As it pertains to investigations, I mean, if you're investigating any crime or even any call for service, you should be able to impartially, I would certainly hope that you can impartially dispatch your duties without, there should be no favoritism, there should be no need to do your job the way you were sworn to do your job. I mean, from my own personal experience, I conduct the background checks on all new town employees. Obviously over the course of 20, almost 5 years in the town, I have relationships with department heads or people that work in departments, but I've had to investigate them, and sometimes you have to put those things aside. As hard as that can be, you have to be fair, you have to be impartial. Again, during the assessment center, they asked a question about internal affairs investigations, and at one point, I had to investigate somebody who was one of my best friends. He had lived in my house at one point with his wife and daughter. And the result of that was he was suspended for 30 days because of what he did. So you're holding that person accountable for their behavior, not for anything else. And if they can't accept that, and for a while, 8 to 10 years, it put a little bit of a strain on our relationship. But he's actually now my jiu-jitsu coach, so everything's pretty good, I think. And we get along great. I don't know, he hasn't tried to strangle before. Outside of practice. So, but no, again, that's something to watch out for. I mean, I think that if you get any inkling that someone's not performing their duties completely or impartially, whether it's based on a friendship or a pre-existing relationship or anything like that, I mean, I think if they're aware of that, they should recuse themselves from whatever investigation or that they're doing, if it is in fact an investigation. But a call for service, there should be no issue with that, and I would hope the supervisors or the officer in charge, the senior officer, is aware of that and could redirect that person correctly. And if not, they'll be trained to watch out for those things and do that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm only supposed to ask the question on the list. I can't ask like, have you always gone by Scott?
All right, we can let that, we'll let that one go.
You can,
Yeah.
because it wouldn't be.
Brief if you want. Yeah, my father's the only one that calls me Rich, or any variation of Richard. He's the one that suggested R. Scott when I went and got my license, which was more than a few days ago. He never foreseeing, obviously, the age of computerization.
Yes.
And the problems that come with first name R, and I go, and the computer says no. So, yeah. So, yes, Richard Scott, but yes, R. Scott.
See now, I usually don't give out my first name. It usually I think my partner knew me for like 6 or 7 years before I knew what my real first name was. It's actually Robert, it's my father's first name, and so I've always gone by my middle name.
That's a good.
And yes, the variations I just did on closing up my mortgage, and like all the aliases that had to live, because all the various permutations you could get of first name is R. Scott, first name is RS, first name is R, it's all kinds of fun of those things.
I feel your pain.
Yes. That wasn't one of my 3 follow questions.
I had that one too. That's great.
As you think about the police reform and the new police standards in Massachusetts, in what ways do you feel you have supported conversation around diversity and inclusion in your current position? And then in what ways would you, as Berlin's police chief, continue these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, the police reform bill, it was well overdue. It was a needed change. And, unfortunately, as far back as 2000, well, beyond that, but definitely in 2015, President Obama had a task force that looked into the 21st century policing report was what came out of it, and the 6 pillars and all the things. And it was just a blueprint for how to conduct policing. And the biggest takeaway, the first pillar was procedural justice and transparency. It's what people were clamoring for and asking for. And unfortunately, as a whole, as an entity, as policing, we didn't listen. Right? We didn't listen enough, certainly. And unfortunately, things went the way they went. And I mean, I personally welcome the police reform bill. I think there's some excellent changes in it. Again, there's mandated, unfortunately they have to mandate things sometimes, but mandated training on on bias, identification, elimination, you know, on diversity and inclusion, and being aware of differences in people. And the main thing that I've done, I think, to further that, or further that conversation, is obviously we have these conversations consistently, myself, the other lieutenants, the chief, we have these conversations. But I think the biggest thing you can do is treat people with respect and treat people with dignity. I don't care who they are or where they're from. I mean, just treat people decently. Because when people have nothing else left, they'll fight you for dignity. And there's nothing else, and that's it. But there's no reason not to treat people with, again, fairness. And I'm quoted frequently as saying, you're going to put the word fair on my gravestone, because it's so fundamental, right? It's such an easy thing, and it boggles my mind sometimes that people aren't fair or can act out of spite or anger, or there's no reason for it. So, like anything else, and how would I ensure it here? I mean, again, continue those conversations, make them aware, make the officers aware that you need to be certified in order to be a police officer in Massachusetts. And in order to be certified, you have to abide by the rules that were set out and the different changes that have been made. And you have to complete all the mandatory training. But again, continue to talk about it. Have those conversations. You know, what issues are you having, or what questions do you have about this? But I just think the most basic human dignity thing is just treat people with respect. People sometimes just want to be heard, you know, and have it's a conversation, you know. You don't have to have raised voices. I mean, there are some times where obviously you can't have a conversation with someone that's running at you with a knife, or it has to be a very short conversation. But you can have, most of the time, you can have conversations with people and just explain to them what you're going to do or why you're here to do what you're intending to do, and do they have a better idea? I mean, there's plenty of flexibility in our job, you know, and to think otherwise is short-sighted, in my opinion.
Berlin's a relatively small town, but we're not immune from serious crime or the opioid crisis.
Right.
What level of commitment with respect to preventing domestic violence, assaults, and overdoses in the Berlin community? And then what other stakeholders would you engage in these prevention efforts?
Yeah, I mean, again, you're not immune. I mean, there are cities nearby that have more significant problems, obviously, than Berlin does. But you know, one of the things now, one of my best friends is the chief of police in Westboro, and I know that they have reached out, and with several other towns, they engage in a grant program where they have a clinician that rides along, you know, in 3 or 4 different communities, so they share that clinician. But that's the thing, you know, a lot of these, they're not just substance abuse disorders or issues. They're sometimes linked to mental health issues. So you need access, at least. I'm not suggesting that it's maybe the right fit for Berlin to have somebody riding along constantly, but I think you need to have access to that person. And there's a grant program through advocates that allows access, and you know, maybe that would be something that, you know, with some of the surrounding communities, whether it's Boylston, Clinton, whomever, you know, get together with them and let's work on a program where we have access to those kind of people. You know, every police officer in the world is going to say, well, you can't arrest your way out of the problem, which, yeah, we've proven that you can't. But pre-arrest, you know, arrest diversion type programs are necessary, and again, they're disorder problems. They're not just, and they obviously they lead, you know, drug problems lead to other problems, crime-related problems, and because those people are trying to feed their habit, and they don't have much, they're not really driving the bus anymore, you know, and they're doing things that they probably never envisioned. You know, my wife will frequently or famously say to me, nobody grew up wanting to be an addict, you know, and it's true. You know, at some point something went wrong, whether it, you know, whatever it was, and they chose that as the route. But you know, I think you have to look at it as a multi-layer, multifaceted problem. You know, with regards to domestic violence, I think that was part of the question. You know, domestic violence laws are a little bit more clear-cut, and you know, are there some other contributing factors, mental health issues and substance issues involved in a lot of domestic? Yeah, absolutely. But those are more mandated arrest type situations, so there's less flexibility, and rightfully so, there should be. But from there, if you can offer other services, whether it's to the victim or, even down the road, I don't want to say to the abuser necessarily, but just there's obvious, nothing occurs in a vacuum, right? There's always other contributing factors. So, as much as we can, now in policing, you're involved in every single social issue and every single question. You're at least a portion of the answer, and as well you should be. I mean, you should be part of that team that's coming up with the answer. And, arresting someone at a domestic violence situation will solve the problem in that particular 12-hour period, but long term, that's a family that probably needs services, especially if there's children involved.
If you're hired, if you would give us a sort of a look at what you think your first 30 to 60 days at chief would look like as in terms of sort of internal management, external affairs, and community engagement, and then what you think some of your sort of greatest challenges might be in the first sort of 30 or 60 days.
I actually have a 90-day transition plan in my bag that I wrote up. If you'd like it, but I'll still answer.
Yeah. I like stats and things like that.
I'm sorry.
I like stats and things like that.
It's essentially it's
Sure.
That's okay. So obviously, I mean, meeting for me, the first 3-month period is kind of imperative as far as setting the ground rules and the expectations, but again, getting out and being part, starting to become immersed in the community and be at different events, whatever events are upcoming, town-wide. But initially, I would plan to meet with all the officers and clearly set out those expectations as soon as I possibly could, and I'd like to interview or speak. Interview sounds very formal, but sit down and talk with each and every one of them. What works? What doesn't work? If you were sitting in this chair, what would you do? There's a wealth of knowledge and experience, in the department, and it's foolhardy for me to think I'm going to walk in on day one and be like, all right, here's how it's going to be. No. I mean, you got to listen. It's be an active listener, especially always, but definitely in that first initial period, and hear everybody's complaints, hear everybody's, hey, this is great, and I met Sergeant Shartner through the assessment process, and I had an excellent conversation after the fact outside, and I think he and I are on the same page in a lot of ways, in some aspects, leadership-wise, definitely, and I think it's important to get everybody on the same page, and top to bottom. And that is done, obviously through training, but through just what is our common goal? What do we do well? What do we do better than anybody else? And, kind of like that hedgehog principle, so to speak. And, let's go with that, let's further that, but let's also figure out what don't we do well. And in those meetings, with the town administrator, with each of you, without violating any open meeting rules or laws, have a meeting, have those meetings. What do you've been here. You tell me what they're not doing well and what we're not, where we can improve. Again, it comes back to the service aspect of things, and we're providing a service. Are we providing a good service? Or where can we improve that service? So, I think again, having conversations. My undergraduate degrees in communications. I 100% believe in communication. And that's where a lot of things go wrong. It's when there's either a miscommunication or a lack of communication. I think open lines of communication with the board, with the town administrator, and then again with the command staff. I know there's 2 sergeants, but then with the rest of the department, there's no reason not to be able to communicate and make everybody understand and clear about what your intentions are and why you're doing what you're doing. But for me, again, like I said, I think initially it's the old. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So people want to know that you care about them, that you care, and that you're invested in them. And again, I have to earn their trust. You don't just walk through the door and snap your fingers and say, you better respect me, and it's not that way. It's not, yeah, we work in a paramilitary organization, and there's a rank structure, but I intend to earn their respect, not just demand it.
I am conscious of the time. No, we have the clock
Oh,
fixed
sorry.
here. But I definitely think we have time for a couple of questions, if you have some for us.
I actually don't have, I mean, just curious about, from here, what the process, what exactly is left to do.
As our chief procurement officer, you
Oh,
want to?
chief procurement. What are we buying today?
You like that? You like that? Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So this is these are the final interviews. Tonight are the final interviews that the board is conducting. The board has an opportunity tonight to deliberate. They have an opportunity tonight to make a decision if they feel that they're ready to do that. If not, at their next meeting, that would be scheduled. But Chief Galvin left to go to Sherburne on October 29th. So we do have the vacancy in the chief position currently. Eric Schartner is our interim chief. So I think the board is going to be looking for Chief Galvin's permanent replacement as, in as timely a manner as possible.
Because assuming it would be, if it was an outside person that was selected, hopefully me, then you would have to, there would be a notice to the other department, and also, I would assume if all went well, December 1st would be a start time, I would hope, around about that time.
Yeah, I think that would be.
And I know just from my perspective, I'd be able to split time, between the two. I have a fair amount of flexibility with my schedule at work because of, with the investigations part, I can make my own schedule, so to speak. My chief is very supportive of my efforts, quite honestly. I wouldn't be in this position if he wasn't.
That's great. Well, one way or another, we are going to let all candidates know the outcome, and
I don't know if I took
That's
up
it.
too much time.
No, we're good. We're absolutely good on time.
Yep.
All right.
Right.
Great.
Did you have
all right.
You
Sorry.
good? Did you have any other questions? Or you?
I don't. Is there any question that I didn't completely answer, or that you need needed to expound on anything? I've already.
I've got my page and a half of notes.
Yeah.
I know the next candidate was scheduled for 8:15. So.
My only observation is that, some of these topics are really heavy topics.
Yeah.
And, it just brings out, the need for good, community-oriented policing nowadays, so.
You're not going to
Appreciate
get the changes that need to happen in policing, or that are in the process of happening. You're not going to accomplish those without complete buy-in from the community and support from the community. And,
Agreed.
I know you went, I believe it was voted on last night, but the establishment of that, the fund, the contingency, the public safety fund, and because there are going to be costs associated with moving forward, and whether it's body cameras or whatever the case, whether those are funded or unfunded. Right now it's funded and not a mandate, but that could change, I'm sure. So, all right, excellent.
Awesome. Thank you so much
Thank
for coming. We
you.
appreciate your time.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we're going to pause for another minute, and we'll be right back. All right, and we are back. I feel like I'm on a game show.
Da-da-da.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
We are back. So thank you for coming tonight. Very much appreciate you being here. We haven't met. I'm Peg, the chair of the select board.
And I'm Chris.
I'm Scott. We just met Mahler.
There you go. Nice to meet you. So each of us have 3 questions for you.
Okay.
So I'll ask my 3 and then down, and then we'll leave plenty of time at the end for follow-up questions from you or questions that you have burning that you want to ask us about.
Sure.
All right.
I think to be fair, the
Yes.
3 questions are really like 25 questions.
Yeah.
opposed-
Yeah,
That's true. Full
this is true. Yeah,
disclosure.
as I start off with, well, here's my question, and oh, by the way, there's 2 parts. So
Margaret, do you have another copy of the questions?
here, you can borrow
I
mine.
can use my other ones. I was just writing all over them.
Well, you can borrow mine after I do my. my 3. Here, we'll leave them here. I'm good.
Oh, okay.
All right, you ready? Okay. Part 1 of question 1. Tell us what your plans are and how quickly you plan to enact them to have your department perform community outreach, and if you could define those types of outreach efforts.
Sure. Community policing is obviously a big part of policing, especially in these small towns. It's one of the things I love about small town policing is you get to get that community engagement. Every call for service we have is a chance to interact with the community, and that's at its basic. Every call we have is a chance to interact with the community. We can build those relationships, we can talk to people. There's a lot of different events we can do for community outreach. One of the more beneficial ones that I've seen that people really like is Are You Okay calls for the elderly. It's daily calls you can do, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, whatever a family chooses, that the police department would call and check in on a resident in town just to make sure they're okay. If they don't answer, we then go to their house, make sure everything's on the up and up. If they need any help, we can help them out, do something like that. So that's a really good program. There's all sorts of different ones, you know, Coffee with a Cop. They have all the big ones. You get to go and interact with people. Me, I like personally just going out daily, going to the local coffee shop, having coffee, talking with the residents, the community members. I recommend and suggest to all my other officers that I work with to go out and interact. Boxborough is very similar to Berlin, small community, one main road, one main highway that comes through town. We get a chance to know people. We can go out and go to the baseball games, the soccer fields, the schools, interact with the kids all the time. We had Halloween last week. I was working that evening. I got to drive around with the cruise lights on. I was talking to all the children, trying to scam myself some candy for the evening. Worked out well. I got Twizzlers. It was good. So, but again, just daily activities is the best way to connect with the community.
And my part 2 is, could you share with us either what you do personally for community outreach or that you do as an officer in your town?
Sure. Again, it's again every call for service we have. I go get my coffee at the coffee shop and store in town every morning. I go down, I talk to the owner Mike, talk to the residents that come in, drive around, talk to people walking, check on the fields. We have a couple fields in Boxborough. People always walking their dogs, you know, walking, playing with their children, just going around, stopping, talking. I love talking to people. I love talking, as I'm sure you'll find out shortly. I could talk forever. Just being out and about, being visible, being seen. And again, any call for service, asking people if they need anything else while we're there. That's my big thing. Is there anything else I can help you with while I'm here helping you? Do you need anything else? And I found that I've helped quite a few people over the years just by asking that question with other problems they may have that we weren't necessarily there for.
Okay, thank you. All right, steal this back for a second.
Yeah, I've got one now.
I have an extra
I
copy.
found it.
Because I'm using the resumes to write.
Okay.
As opposed to the question.
I'm assuming that you've taken a look at our annual town budget that is on our Town of Berlin website.
Yes.
Could you tell us, share with us, specific plans, either with the current budget or future budgets, to ensure that your budget does not exceed the overall percentage increase in the total town budget, and that is 2.5%?
Sure. So staffing is obviously the biggest budget item, salary for the officers. One way to ensure that is, you know, to look at previous budgets, see how they're lining up, see how we're currently fitting. Obviously, there's an increase every year, like you said. Berlin has use of part-timers. That's not something we use in Boxborough, so that's an added benefit that they have, those part-timers, the reserves that can fill shifts. But as a working officer, my whole career as a chief, one thing I could do is fill shifts during the day or even evening sometimes. If you see the budget's getting close or if there's an issue with staffing, I teach a lot of different classes. I'm very proactive as far as being out on the road and still working. That's something I'd absolutely still love to do, is get out there and help. But that's one big way, is to help supplement shifts as a chief, staffing coverage, because again, salary is the biggest cost of the budget for the police department.
Okay. And my final question, could you please walk us through your process, who you've spoken to, reached out to? What have you done to learn about our town?
I'm from the area, so I'm familiar with it a little bit. I grew up in Air, in Shirley. I work in obviously Boxborough, which is a couple towns away. I come through town frequently to take my kids to hockey in Marlboro, so we're always just driving through and around, so I'm somewhat familiar with the town. I reached out to the former chief, Chief Galvin. I talked to him. chewed his ear for a little bit, asking some questions. Drove around town a little bit, did a lot of Google research. And, you know, I found that the communities are very similar to where I grew up and where I work now. And it's one of the things I loved about Berlin is it's very similar to what I'm used to.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. All right, Chris, you're up.
So what are the skills that you feel would be most needed to be a good police chief for the town of Berlin?
Again, like most small towns, communication is huge. You need to be a good communicator with the officers in the department, with the select board, with the town administrator, and with the community members. You need to be transparent, you need to be open, you need to be accountable. And a lot of that goes through communication, letting people know what's going on, what you're doing, what steps you're taking to, you know, get the job done. So again, communication is the big one. Again, visibility is a big one. As a chief, you're the head of the department, you need to be seen. The community members need to know that you're out there, you're available. I have an open door policy with my officers. My office is always open. I would do the same thing as a chief. Come see me anytime you want. You know, concerns, comments, anything. Because communication goes both ways. I'd love to know what I'm doing wrong, what I'm doing right, what people like, what they don't like. Communication is the big thing.
Okay. And my second question is sort of a multi-question.
Multi-question question.
So the new Berlin Police Chief will be expected to achieve certification of the department followed by accreditation. Keeping this in mind, can you discuss your leadership and communication style and your impressions around a most effective command structure?
Sure. So I'll try to remember to answer all parts of that.
There's still some more.
Oh, I should probably write this down.
She goes back. She goes back over
Please
3 or 4
remind me
times,
about
so
that.
you're good.
Okay.
So management style is, I would say, engaged. I like being involved. I like talking to people. You know, engage with the daily operations, talking to people, making sure their needs are met, making sure they're being held accountable, getting their input. As far as accreditation, I recently took over as the accreditation manager for my department. I was the assistant accreditation manager since we started 6 years ago now, 4 years ago, I forget what it is now, but we just obtained re-accreditation, went through certification, then accreditation. So I'm very familiar with policies. I write policies, I review policies, I edit policies. And that's one of the biggest things for accountability for the police department is to have good policies in place. It helps lead the officers, guide the officers, and it helps hold them accountable. They have a guidance, they know what to do, they know how to follow it. And then it's good for the department and the municipality as far as liability-wise. You have good policies in place, the officers have good training, good heads up, so they know how to perform their duties to the best of their ability. Did I miss any part of that?
I don't think so. And how will you ensure awareness and accountability, attention to detail, and policy compliance within Berlin Police Department?
Sure, so there's a lot of different ways to do it. Again, effective communication is the best way. Having the right systems in place. We use a program called PMAM that I would implement. It is a tracking system. You can upload all your policies to the system. It's given to the officers. It's a web-based program. They sign off on the policies. It gives them the policy, they read it, they check it off. It's now logged, timestamped, dated that that officer read that policy. That goes towards getting them the policy, make sure they get them, and then accountability later down the line. If something happens, say, oh, I never saw that. You can go back into the system and say, oh, you did this date and time, you signed that policy, and then we correct the action. Sometimes it's just reissuing the policy again. Sometimes it's more, you know, severe action, but it depends on what it is. But that is one good way to track the policies, having systems like that in place. And again, accountability, it's everything we do in this profession, we need to have accountability for, whether it's hours worked, policies, so you have to have good tracking in place for that. There's other web-based programs we use called DTS that tracks every hour worked, every shift. You can go back and look at everything. So we make sure every officer is accounted for, every hour they work, every detail hour, every overtime hour. In case there's ever a question, we can go back and say, this is what they worked, this was the day, it was logged all here.
Okay. Okay, and my last question is that Berlin's a very small town where everyone knows everyone. And what would be your advice to your officers on how to remain impartial with residents when investigating a case?
It's part of our job, we deal with everybody. Again, like you say, I grew up in a small town, I work in a small town. You're right, everybody knows everything. You have to do your job, regardless of who it is. You have to be accountable, you have to be professional at all times. Having a relationship with someone isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, when people try to sway your opinion, that's when you need to make sure you're ethical and morally correct to make sure you do the job properly. And I set that tone as a chief, showing the officers, this is how it's going to be done, this is the way we do it. I act in an ethical manner, I expect you to act in an ethical manner. Be friendly to everybody. There may be people that get upset with the way we do things. They may expect some sort of privilege or help because they are close, but explain to them, I'm sorry, this is how it has to be. I know you for a long time. This is the way the job has to be per my department policy and guidelines. I'm sorry I can't help you further, but I'll do whatever I can for you. So a lot of it is communication between the officers and the residents, but it is officers knowing they have to act ethically and morally at all times.
Okay.
As you think about the police reform and the new policing standards in Massachusetts, in what ways do you feel you've supported conversations around diversity and inclusion where you're at now? And then what ways will you, as Berlin's police chief, continue those conversations?
Sure. So as you see in my resume, I'm bias-free policing instructor. I also teach fair and impartial policing. I've taken the steps to go and train myself as a trainer for those. I was fortunate enough to grow up in Shirley and Air. When the military base was open, I've been around all sorts of different cultures and ethnicities and people my entire life. My best friend growing up was black. He's still my best friend to this day. He's my youngest son's godfather. He calls my boys their nephew. His daughter's my niece. We lived together for a little bit. So although I will never know what it's like to be anything other than a white male, I have friends and family that I've grown up with that have different experiences, different outlooks. We have conversations all the time. My close friend on race and the police, he'll send me a clip of something and say, hey, what do you think on the police side of things? And I'll tell him my opinion and I'll ask him, you know, what do you see, what do you think? And having those conversations is a big way to help break some of those biases we have. So again, I've taken the step to train myself as being instructed to train others, which I would do here. If I get the chief's job, I would come in and I would run those classes for the officers in this department. But just, again, my daily life, being around other people, having different conversations, that's how I help better myself and how I can be a better officer for my community.
Like Foxborough, Berlin is a small town, but we're also not immune to serious crime and the opioid crisis. What level of commitment with respect to preventing domestic violence, assaults, and overdoses would you have in the town of Berlin? And then what other stakeholders would you bring in to assist in those efforts? Sure,
it's a problem everywhere. Like you said, the small towns are not immune from that. We deal with it all the time in Foxborough and Air, where I live. Awareness is a big thing. Any kind of programs with the district attorney's office. There's domestic violence advocates, DVAP. They're a big asset that we use. Get them involved. COIN, run out of Pepperell PD, is for addiction issues. What I would like to do is implement a community policing officer. I think there might actually be one already, but have them get involved with those different organizations and have that direct pipeline for one officer, that if we have an issue that another officer may handle on a call, they can forward that information to the community policing officer, contact those agencies, departments, the other agencies that we can use to help, and then get involved. Having those connections, having those relationships with those agencies and departments can help bring aid into the town for people that need it.
That's good. And then, if hired, if you give us like sort of your thoughts of what your sort of first or 30 or 60 days might look like as a chief in terms of sort of internal management, external affairs, community integration, and then what do you think would be some of your sort of biggest challenges where you might be looking sort of for us to help out in that first month or two?
Sure. So the first 30, 60, 90 days, taking as much information as I can. First thing I come in, I would look at the budget, see where the budget's at, see where we are, make sure we're on track, make sure there's no issues. Look for any internal affairs issues, if there's any IA issues, any issues with officers that I need to deal with. Then I would meet with the officers, get to know them a little bit, find out their capabilities, their strengths, their weaknesses, see what their likes are, help try to figure out what they are, how they work, so we can work better together. Then meet with the board members in town. Obviously, I've met the select board, but meet with the other board members, meet with other leaders in town, religious leaders, community members, business owners, get to know the community more than I do now, obviously, and then meet with other local chiefs, district attorneys, go to the courthouse, introduce myself, again, start building those relationships that I can use to do my best in this community. As far as help from the select board, just, picking your brains on maybe, how the town is run here that may be different from my experiences in Boxborough and Air, just comparing and seeing what's different, what the select board likes, what the different boards like, how I can best serve the town of Berlin.
That's good.
Okay.
All right. Well, we have left you plenty of time, Nathan, to ask us either follow-up questions to our questions or questions that you have in general. So the floor is yours.
I think, I don't have any follow-up questions other than, did I answer all your questions? I want to make sure I hit on all that.
Chris and her multifaceted one question.
I can also go off on a tangent and talk for a while too, so I lose my own track. So I just want to make sure I hit on everything that the board wanted to ask. Make sure I answered all those questions.
Is there anything else you wanted to share with us that perhaps isn't in your resume?
Just, I live in Air with my wife Melissa. I have my two boys, Matthew and Michael. They're 12 and 9. They're very athletic, so most of my time not spent at work is at soccer fields, hockey rinks, baseball fields. So I'm very, very busy with the family. I grew up in Shirley. I live in Air. My resume says all about my work. That's about it.
All right. Anything from your end there, Mrs. Nardowitz?
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay.
Yeah, it was good.
All right. Do you want to walk through the process with him as you did with the other candidates?
Sure, yeah, so these are the final interviews. As you know, the select board is going to have an opportunity tonight to deliberate if they so choose. They would also have an opportunity to make a decision on the successful finalist tonight if they so choose, and or they could elect to wait until their meeting next Monday to make a final decision. Either way, the board is interested in moving this process forward so that we have a permanent chief in place as soon as possible.
So based on that, any questions? with
No,
that?
that would be the only thing, just a timeline, but
Okay.
that was answered right there.
Great. All right, I think we're good. Thank you again for coming in.
I appreciate the time.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks again.
Thank you, have a great night.
Oh, good. I don't want it back, so.
That's okay.
Cooties.
Are we gonna take a short break or just jump into it?
Let's just jump, because we've taken a few short breaks. Let's
Yep.
just jump.
I'm fine.
I'll put it out there, any candidate that, I know that I have like the order in my head
Right.
for the candidates. Didn't know if we just want to start there, toss out our first choice, see if we're aligned, then maybe go into any discussion if we all have a different one.
I don't know how much I am ready at the moment to rank them. I think they all have some pluses. I would not, if we end up going there, we could still end up doing something tonight, but I would enjoy on a night to think about it, to potentially look back and watch the recording to get a second time to see if I've missed anything. I'm going to point out that Eric was the only one not to give his middle name, so.
Okay. Could you talk to him about that, please? Let him know. Thank you, we appreciate that. Chris, your thoughts?
Well, I think any of them would make a wonderful police chief for a town that's trying to figure out which one is the best fit to be our chief in town. I think I liked Mr. Mills' answers on a lot of things. I did an awful lot of writing, didn't I?
Are you ready to make a decision tonight, or would you prefer
I
to?
probably could, yeah.
And although I might be indecisive at the moment, I think the vetting process we did to get to here got us 3 candidates that I agree that all 3 of them could be.
Excellent. We couldn't ask for any better ones. So
I think it's a
whoever was
testament to
involved.
both.
I hadn't met 2 out of the 3 of them. The MRI took care of all that. I thought that all 3 of them did really well tonight. Yeah.
And so I think that's also just a testament to what we've been doing as a town, obviously global for me, and Chief Galvin had done, that the town has a reputation where quality candidates want to work for us, which I think is a good thing as well. The question I would have liked to have asked Eric, and Eric alone, was just what his thoughts of the pros and cons of from hiring from within. I think there's definitely some great benefits when it comes to some institutional knowledge and some longevity. I think sometimes bringing someone in from the outside also gives you some fresh perspectives and and just a chance to take things in sort of newer directions. And I would love to take his sort of take on that. And I thought it would have been unfair to ask the other candidates because in some respects,
Correct.
their only answers might be that, like, you have to hire outside, of course, you know. And I don't want to put them in a place where they might accidentally say something disparaging of the other candidate, not knowing that's what they have done.
As I mentioned, I, throughout the process, would often think, yep, nope, yep, nope, nope, yep. So, I mean, it kept switching. You know, there were certain answers that made the candidates go up and down in my rank, but I'm extremely confident that I have the order of which the candidate that I would prefer to have as the chief of police. So,
Do you want to share any of your notes with us?
I do, yes. Peg, the queen of writing, here. Well, you know, because like Scott, I want to be able to go back and take a look. I mean, all of them were community focused, which was nice. I think really the main question that I really wanted them to answer was, how did they learn about our town? Because you know what, a budget question is pretty standard. Here's your bucket. Right. You got to stay, because if you go up, guess what? You're going back. So that was almost a non-question question. And on their resumes, it's easy to see what they do for community service with that. But the big thing to me was learning about our town, which kind of goes into one of your questions, Chris, that Berlin is a very small town. And, you know, how do you learn about it? You know, Eric obviously comes in with multiple years of knowledge about the town. Mr. Mills, I got the impression that he really didn't know a lot about our town as well. You know, that's great that he could cite our population and our registered voters, but to me, when you're interacting with an officer, whether you see him or you're talking to him or her, whether they pull you over and you have a chat, to me, there's more to that than, well, you have 3,000 people in your town and 2,000 are registered. Great. So,
Well, one of the things I found with Mr. Mills is that after he started to feel comfortable, then he sort of opened up a little bit. And I don't feel at the beginning that he was probably quite comfortable enough, perhaps, to in the answers to some of the questions. But
yeah. I mean, he did share kind of, and I caught it, I don't know if either of you did, you know, that he had a little disparaging comment about his current boss, and I'm thinking, you don't do that in an interview.
Well, but at the same time, said his boss is supportive and helping him through,
Correct.
You know, in advancements. And I think in a small town, especially when there's not sometimes a lot of opportunities for advancement, acknowledging that there are some people on the force who want to be a chief or a lieutenant at some point, and helping them get there, even if it means they're not with this town when they do it,
Right.
it is a decent skill to have and be aware of.
Yeah. I mean, I found Nathan extremely personable, you know, with that, and I could see him driving around town and just be like, hey, what's up?
Yeah.
How are you? You know, type of thing. if you're asking me specifically which candidate I would lean towards, I'm more than willing to share that with you, but I don't, if Scott, you want to think about it, and Chris, I don't know if you're ready.
Well, I could be persuaded. Again, I thought Mr. Mills was the grant writing experience, I think, would be a great addition to town, because we rely on sort of volunteers. Margaret do most of it now, and being able to spread that around a
Right.
little bit would help the town, especially since we don't do a lot of it now. That would be a net add to the town.
Chief
when I-
Weldon did do.
Right, yeah, and then when you look at sort of preparedness and thinking about it, showing up with a written 90-day plan.
Yes.
The written 90-day plan, and what it did in the first 9 days, I thought had some pieces to it. And so I thought from sort of a knowledge base and sort of paperwork part, I thought he would be right. Whether or not, I had a hardest time seeing him hanging out at the general store, just, shooting the breeze with someone, or sitting down at 19 Carter and do it. Of the three, I had the hardest time seeing him do it. I think he could do it. I think he knows the importance of doing it. But I don't know how much that is his strengths.
Yeah.
And so
I actually think I could see him, because he tended to talk about being a good listener, and people just want to be heard.
Yeah. I thought it was neat that he has actually chatted with and talked to the two other candidates. I mean, the names of the candidates are an open issue. It's on here. They went through the testing sort of together. And on his, if I'm allowed to introduce things that happened outside of the room, on his way out, he stopped and talked to the last candidate, and Scott talked to the last candidate and wished him well and shook his hand. And so, that is the, when you look at sort of fair play and well, that could have been, in some circumstances of life, that could have been an uncomfortable situation for both of them, and it wasn't for him. And I'm sure as officers, you're in what could be uncomfortable situations a lot, that you have to try to make the best of and make it work.
What I did like about all three of them, that each of them mentioned the need to start working with resources for mental health issue. And I think the town is very blessed to have Victoria there, and I'm sure her network of people is something that we can't even begin to fathom. So I was very pleased that all three of them mentioned that that's important to have for, for our small town.
Right.
With that.
Sadly, and somewhat on me, I think I know Eric the least, especially of the three of us. The answers, I mean, the interview went fast and relatively short, I think, because in some respects there are unsaid things he knows the town. We don't have to ask them what you know about the town of Berlin. He's worked here for forever. I have seen him around. We have, as interim now, he has prepared some monthly reports, and so we get to see how that happens and how those pieces are at. And so for people who are potentially watching and thinking that was relatively short, is because there are interactions we get to have with him. And so there are some questions we don't need to follow up on, or he appropriately didn't feel the need of regurgitating something back to us that we already know. Which is a great sort of thing, is preserving our time is something I sort of like. I think of the three, I think Eric is the most active when it comes to service outside of the job or service as part of the job. I thought that Nathan, again, was most charismatic, most personal. I could definitely see him doing things, but totally dodged the question of service. And there's not much on his resume, and he didn't talk about it here. He talked about the importance of it, but not be like, oh, I've been a Boy Scout leader for a while, or I've been I've been a football coach for a while, and there's leadership stuff that goes with some of those service things too. Again, I think someone is, I see some pluses about it. I think all of them would do a great chief, and so I think I could easily be, I would not oppose any name being put forward. I just don't have a strong thing, and And even though I'd like to potentially reflect, I wouldn't stop it if there was a momentum in a direction.
All right, then I'm going to take a leap of faith. I'm going to make a motion here and put forth the candidate that I would like to see for Police Chief of Berlin, and that would be Eric. Chris?
Do you want me to talk about it?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I was impressed that he started here in 1996. I know that he has done the community service with Link, having them do the hayride at Shartner's Farm. He's been involved, I guess, with Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. I think he said empathy was the most needed skill for a police chief in Berlin. He, to my question about knowing everyone and everyone knows you, he said that he must remain impartial. Just, that was pretty much the statement, I believe. I think that's all I have. I wrote down.
Mr. Hawkins?
Again, I think he would do an adequate job. I think, again, all of them would do decent jobs. I have no problem with him as a candidate, as the nominee.
Do you want to talk about each of them, or no?
We can, yeah.
Okay. You talked a little bit about Nathan, correct? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of bounced between Scott and Nathan. The one thing that I did like about Nathan is that he said as chief, I'm willing to take a shift. You know, to me, that's what you do.
Yeah.
An officer is sick, you're down one, whatever, budget's getting tight, you know what? Come play. So I really liked that, and he even said that in his interview, in his resume. I went through and scribbled all over those as well. Both Scott and Nathan didn't seem to have a lot of experience, and again, it's just the makeup of the departments, with part-time, which is what we rely heavily on to do that,
I think that one of them said that it was an advantage, they thought,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
Was it
Yeah,
Scott?
Nathan said it was an advantage.
Yep.
And you see how it is that a part-time person pulling an extra shift a week doesn't put you into overtime. A full-time person putting an extra shift puts you into overtime.
Correct. Yep.
And some of the conversations we had, because because they'll have to be trained to the same level as full-time, that part-time officers could become harder to come by.
The one thing that stuck out at me as I read through Scott's information, and I wrote it down, I didn't circle it where I found it, but he talked about a way to save money was to reduce training. And to me, that, maybe it was how I read it, but that just sent a giant red flag up for me, because I'm thinking, especially now, you have to have your officers trained. You have to stay on top of anything, and if you're looking for a way to cut your budget, that to me is not how to do it. You only get one set of pants. If you have to, you get one set of pants, we'll patch them for you. But to reduce, to pull back on training.
Is that something that you could find in the recipe?
Yeah, I'm looking.
Because I didn't remember that.
Yes, that we can patch pants, yes. Okay. Let's see. You can keep going while I'm looking for it.
Well, I think I already said that he's starting to feel comfortable after a little while and warm up and then opened up a bit.
You know where it was? It was in his letter, the written assessment. That's where I saw it, and I didn't bring it, but that's where I saw it, that he talked about a reduction in training to save money.
Don't we have that?
We don't
Is that
have,
in your packet?
we don't have them.
Not the packet.
Maybe it was, because, you know, sometimes you read things and you can misunderstand what they're
Yeah.
trying to say. That's why I wanted to know where you'd seen it.
Sadly, it is true that in tight budget times, training is one of the first things
Agreed.
that get cut. I mean,
Right.
it's not the greatest thing.
Nope.
No one, I mean, and sadly, when things get better, you sometimes forget to put it back. So.
Let's see. When you asked about community service, he said it was a great ingrained in him. I think when you were asking about budgets, he thought that he had been very successful with grants, which then he wouldn't have to reduce the training. The best skill needed for a good police chief in the town of Berlin would be leadership. And he talked about integrity, honesty, and how, you know, it would be written on his gravestone, fair. So this is the question about. Oh, he actually said that he has, on his own time, I believe he said, he goes out to other communities to evaluate for accreditation. Did he not say that?
Yeah, he's trained to do so.
Yeah. And I did like his answer to my question about remaining impartial with residents. I think I said respect, dignity, people just want to be heard, which is one of the things I say all the time. And we talked about a shared clinician with other towns, and being an active listener, how important it is, and having conversations, getting to know people.
So, Margaret, how much have we had conversation with any of them about benefit packages and salaries and other
Nothing.
stuff? Nothing at this point.
No.
So of the three, it is likely that Eric is at least most aware of where things are at because he's been here, so he's seen town budgets, he's been involved in these sort of things, and so knows the ballparks we're talking about, where the other two might not.
Right, because unfortunately, if you look at the budget, it's just a lump.
Right.
Somewhere, if it was broken out, you could say 10, 20, 30, 40, so, yeah.
Well, but even in a lump is sort of what benefits go with it too, because some towns it includes cars and sometimes it doesn't, and some towns it includes some education benefits and sometimes it doesn't. And that all three of these have masters, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, all three are definitely highly educated, and with training. That gets you the qualifications to get in the door, but it's the stuff that comes out of here, which to me is more important than being able to say, I have a,
Yeah,
Yeah.
in some respects, the master's degrees triggers added compensation.
agreed.
Because the state and federal, I forget what state and federal laws are, but I know that there's one that at different education levels, if you agree to a salary of X, they actually get Y because they get
They have
an
a-
education
yeah.
stipend on top of it.
That's the Quinn bill.
Peg, make your argument for Eric. Convince me. I'm not opposed to it at all. Again, I think all three of them are
Yeah.
willing to do it, and so,
With Eric, to me, he answered all the questions, to my liking. The one thing, and of course, that Eric brings, is that he's a town guy. He knows what's going on in the town. I think that he would be able to work probably a little bit quicker with our existing force to put things into play, that honeymoon period would be there a little bit because Eric would be stepping up, so now it's a different level. It's not, hey buddy, it's, hi chief. You know, so I think that there's some time there that there needs to be a shift from that. But his involvement in the town, you know, what he's been doing, he understands our budgets. He said he's been doing the scheduling for 5 years, you know, so he understands what it's like to come in under budget. You know, the policies and procedures, you know, where he was handed a 3-inch binder, and, you know, he readily acknowledged that people worked under different regulations. You can't have that anymore. It's 1, 2, 3. You, 1, 2, 3. With that, I like his communication style, you know, that he has, that I believe in his current role that he is, you know, better for the department, that he is better for the town. You know, the current officers that we have, of course, they all understand the benchmark and the expectation. I think with Eric being in place now and maybe stepping up, there would be a little bit more of a burden on him to make sure that everything stays in place and it's just not a, we'll let that go, type of thing. You know, he again talked about remaining neutral and taking the appropriate action for that. He's been involved in the reform. You know, he's doing the training. He's coming up with ways to save money. Again, I think it was in his letter that he mentioned when they're doing the gun range, that there's downtime, and so he's incorporating, I think it was CPR training. There was some other training that he was incorporating, so he was making use of time, you know, for that. So I found that extremely creative to be able to do that. You know, he understands that staffing and hiring is not going to be an easy process, but again, staying in town, I think he has a better advantage of it. I think that he has the support, or I would hope that he has the support of the current officer base, whether full-time, part-time, they come in per diem. So to me, that carries a little bit more of having that, and I hate the saying, but it kind of applies in this case. He can literally hit the ground running. He knows what's going on and what needs to happen, where for Nathan and Scott, extremely qualified, both of them, I think that they would take a little bit more time to get going, and I'm not that I want things rushed, but at the same time too, I want to be able to see progress, so that in 30 days, when Eric comes to us, you know, as a board, in a board meeting, he can say, this is what I've done. And he rolls them out, compared to the other two, which would also come and say, hey, I've rolled all these things out, but I think the majority of the time would be the getting to know you. So I'm probably looking for more action-oriented that I feel that Eric could bring now, compared to the other two candidates.
Do we like the way things are going in the police department?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard anything negative. You know, I've run into Eric at the recreation event down in the South Common, and then he was kind enough to let me through the barrier, so that I didn't have to like walk across the street with my chair for Halloween. So you know, but so no, I just think that he gets it. You know, and I think that he has been here, that he knows if there have been stumbles along the way, he knows how to correct them. But unfortunately, you know, in his current previous role, may not have been able to do something about it. But as a chief, he's going, and he's going to correct what needs to be corrected if there are issues out there. You know, I don't know. We've got a great force in the back. You know, not just saying that because you're back there, but it's nice. It reminds me, the force today reminds me of the force that we had growing up, you know, Mr. Bradley and Henry and, you know, all those guys where they just stopped. Hey, how you doing? So you didn't get that, oh my God, there's a cop in my driveway. It's, hey, how are you? You know, type of thing. So I get that same feeling with that. And I think that Eric would continue that going forward.
recluse, I've never seen the email list in my neighborhood, because I think every time a police car drives up Village Lane or Village Court, there's an email like, is there something wrong? Is there someone in trouble? And you guys are still encouraged to drive up there. I think it's more just to make sure that we don't have a resident who's having an emergency that we should be helping out with. So. Again, I think all three of them could do the job. I think Berlin would be proud to have any one of the three.
Agreed.
I am fine supporting your motion to make Eric our leading candidate and let Margaret sort of negotiate the nitty-gritty parts and hopefully do that in a decent time frame, so if that doesn't work out, we have time to get to the others. Because again, I think we would be well served with town with any one of the three of them.
Yep. And I think all three of them understand the urgency of the timeline of, Chief Galvin left 2 weeks ago, and we've got an interim, but we gotta close that gap. But I want to close the gap with the right person. I just don't want to plug the hole because we have to plug the hole, because that will only cause issues farther down the line.
And then, Kristen, where are you? Because I don't want you to feel like you're railroaded into something if you have feelings the other direction. I mean, are you ready to make something tonight, or?
Oh, I think I could do that tonight.
Okay. So I will formally second the motion that you put out there to nominate Eric as our, I forget, you'll have to fix whoever's running the minutes will have to fix the wording, but as our proposed next police chief.
There you go. Okay.
So you made the motion?
She made the motion.
Oh, she made the
I'm
motion.
seconding that motion.
You're making this second, okay.
We always have issues with who's making
Yeah, I
motions
know.
and seconding. That's our consistency.
Usually just say, it was made and passed.
Correct. All right, motion and a second. Put it to a vote.
We don't have to.
Oh, we don't have to do that because we're
roll call. We're
here.
not on Zoom. Just raise
With
it.
this kind of a vote, don't you have to?
Do we have to?
It's all
Well,
right.
Well, you
I don't
can, I
mind.
mean, you can to make it really formal.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah,
Talk
but-
about being like trained.
You're in person,
Right.
so
Right.
yeah.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing nothing. So we would like to formally recommend Eric Shartner as our next town chief of police person.
Okay, subject to contract negotiations?
Subject to contract
Okay.
negotiations and everything after that.
Okay.
And do we need to do parameters as far as salary?
Things like that.
Yeah, so what I would ask is that on Monday night, we go into executive session to discuss strategy with respect.
Let me add that to my notes for the agenda.
Reason number two.
Because that's allowed for executive session.
That is correct.
Because
Yeah.
Okay,
in
yep.
public
So-
meeting, we're like, well, we'll lowball him here, but we're willing to go to this level.
Yeah, really. Really, let me look
Yeah.
back at the tape.
So that would be the opportunity to discuss parameters.
Okay. All right, so executive session next Monday. All right, I think we are
It'll
done.
be a long meeting on
It will be a long meeting, so, make sure everyone have your lunch,
Yep.
or have your dinner, bring your snacks. I'll have the tea brought in. So appreciate you being here. Thank you for that.
Next week we're doing that.
And thank you for your cooperations. Margaret, thank you. Thank you to the town of Berlin. Have a great night.
Yep.